Welcome to Crime Story with Camila. Today we delve into one of the most harrowing and consequential scandals in the history of sports, the Larry Nassar scandal. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thought on this chilling mystery. Let's delve in. This case shook the world, revealing a decades-long pattern of sexual abuse committed by a man who was entrusted with the care of elite athletes. But this was more than just one predator's crimes. It exposed deep-rooted institutional failures within USA Gymnastics, USAG, Michigan State University, MSU, and even the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, all of which enabled Nassar to continue his abuse for years. How did a man in such a trusted position manage to victimize hundreds of young athletes without being stopped? Why did institutions meant to protect these athletes turn a blind eye? And what does justice truly look like for the survivors who bravely came forward? In this deep dive, we will explore the timeline of Nassar's abuse, the courageous voices of survivors who took him down, the systemic failures that allowed the abuse to continue unchecked, and the aftermath that forever changed the landscape of sports and justice. This is the story of the Larry Nassar scandal, a case of betrayal, survival, and ultimately reckoning. Larry Nassar was once regarded as a highly respected and trusted figure in the world of gymnastics and sports medicine. Born in 1963, he built a career that placed him at the center of elite athletics, serving as the team doctor for USA Gymnastics, USAG, and a sports physician at Michigan State University, MSU. For over 2 decades, he worked with some of the most talented young athletes in the world, including Olympic champions. Nassar presented himself as a caring and knowledgeable doctor, earning the trust of athletes, parents, and coaches. He developed a reputation for his so-called innovative treatments, often conducting medical procedures without gloves, behind closed doors, and without the presence of a third party. Many of his victims were young gymnasts, some as young as 6 years old, who believed they were receiving legitimate medical care. But beneath this trusted image lay a horrifying reality. Nassar was systematically sexually abusing his patients under the guise of medical treatment. For decades, he was able to manipulate and exploit his position of power, convincing athletes that his methods were necessary for their performance and recovery. What's even more disturbing is that complaints about Nassar's inappropriate behavior surfaced long before his eventual downfall. Reports indicate that concerns about his conduct were raised as early as the late 1990s, yet they were repeatedly ignored or dismissed by institutions that should have acted to protect young athletes. So, how did he get away with it for so long? The answer lies not just in Nassar's manipulation, but also in the systemic failures of USA Gymnastics, Michigan State University, and even federal authorities who failed to take swift action when complaints surfaced. As we unravel the timeline of events, it becomes clear that Nassar's crimes were not just an individual failure, but a collective one, an institutional betrayal that enabled his abuse for decades. The first public allegations against Larry Nassar emerged in September 2016, when former gymnast Rachel Denhollander came forward with a harrowing account of sexual abuse disguised as medical treatment. Her story, published in the Indianapolis Star, opened the floodgates, encouraging dozens of other survivors to share their own horrifying experiences. But Nassar's abuse didn't begin in 2016, it had been happening for decades. The earliest known allegations date back to 1997, when athletes and their parents reported concerns about his treatments. However, both Michigan State University, MSU, and USA Gymnastics, USAG, repeatedly dismissed these complaints, allowing him to continue his abuse for nearly 20 more years. In 2015, USA Gymnastics was formally alerted to Nassar's misconduct when multiple athletes reported being inappropriately touched during examinations. Instead of immediately notifying law enforcement, USAG conducted an internal investigation and waited 5 weeks before reporting Nassar to the FBI. This delay proved to be catastrophic. During this time, Nassar continued to see patients and abuse more victims. The scandal gained momentum when the Indianapolis Star published an expose in 2016, detailing how USA Gymnastics had a history of covering up sexual abuse cases. This report prompted more than 150 women to step forward with accusations against Nassar. Soon after, federal authorities launched an investigation, and shocking new evidence surfaced. Over 37,000 images and videos of child pornography were found in Nassar's possession. The fallout was swift. In November 2016, Nassar was arrested on charges of child pornography. The following month, multiple survivors filed lawsuits against USA Gymnastics, Michigan State University, and the United States Olympic Committee, USOC, for failing to protect athletes. By early 2017, the scope of the scandal had expanded beyond sports, turning into one of the largest sexual abuse cases in U.S. history. As more survivors came forward, the world watched in shock as the institutions that were supposed to protect these young athletes were exposed for enabling and covering up years of abuse. But the real turning point came in January 2018 during Nassar's sentencing hearings, where survivors had the opportunity to confront him directly in court. What followed was one of the most powerful moments in legal history. More than 150 women, including Olympic champions Ali Raisman, Michaela Maroney, Simone Biles, and Jordan Weber, delivered emotional victim impact statements, describing in painful detail how Nassar's abuse had affected their lives. As the courtroom listened in stunned silence, one thing became clear. This was not just about Larry Nassar. It was about systemic failure, institutional betrayal, and a culture of silence that allowed a predator to thrive. The Larry Nassar scandal was not just about the crimes of one man. It was about the incredible bravery of the survivors who spoke out despite immense pressure and institutional cover-ups. Their courage not only led to Nassar's downfall, but also sparked a global conversation about abuse, power, and accountability. One of the first women to publicly accuse Nassar was Rachel Denhollander, a former gymnast and attorney. In 2016, she shared her story in the Indianapolis Star, knowing that speaking out would come at a personal and professional cost. Despite facing skepticism and backlash, her testimony paved the way for over 500 survivors to come forward. Among them were some of the biggest names in gymnastics, including Ali Raisman, Simone Biles, Michaela Maroney, and Jordan Weber. These Olympic champions, who had once been celebrated as America's heroes, now stood in court, recounting the horrific abuse they suffered under the pretense of medical treatment. One of the most powerful moments came during Nassar's sentencing hearings in January 2018, where 156 women delivered emotional victim impact statements. These testimonies were raw, heartbreaking, and filled with anger toward Nassar and the institutions that had enabled him. Ali Raisman, a two-time Olympian, directly confronted Nassar in court, saying, "You do not deserve to walk outside of a prison ever again. You have done nothing to deserve our forgiveness. I will not rest until every last person who enabled your abuse is held accountable." Kyle Stevens, the first person to publicly accuse Nassar of abuse outside the gymnastics world, also shared her painful story. She was just 6 years old when the abuse began. Looking directly at Nassar, she told him, "Little girls don't stay little forever. They grow into strong women that destroy your world." Despite their bravery, the road to justice was not easy. Many survivors were ignored or silenced for years before the truth finally came to light. But their resilience forced the world to reckon with the dark reality. Abuse thrives in silence, and it takes extraordinary courage to break it. The voices of Nassar's victims will forever be remembered, not as broken survivors, but as warriors who fought for justice and changed the world. The legal battle against Larry Nassar was a long and painful process, but it ultimately led to one of the most significant convictions of a serial sexual predator in U.S. history. The case involved multiple legal proceedings across different courts, including state and federal cases, as well as lawsuits against institutions that enabled his abuse. In September 2016, following an investigative report by the Indianapolis Star, Rachel Denhollander became the first woman to publicly accuse Nassar of sexual abuse. Soon after, dozens of women came forward, leading to a criminal investigation. In December 2016, Nassar was arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct in Michigan. Investigators also discovered tens of thousands of child pornography images on his computer, leading to federal charges. Before standing trial for sexual abuse, Nassar pleaded guilty in July 2017 to federal child pornography charges. The case revealed that he had possessed over 37,000 images of child sexual abuse. Some of the images dated back to 2004, showing his long history of predatory behavior. He had molested young girls while pretending to perform medical treatments. In December 2017, Nassar was sentenced to 60 years in federal prison for child pornography crimes, ensuring he would never be free again. In addition to federal charges, Nassar faced multiple cases in Michigan for sexually abusing young gymnasts at Michigan State University and USA gymnastics training facilities. Nassar pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree sexual assault. The sentencing hearing became historic, as 156 survivors bravely gave victim impact statements over 7 days. Judge Rosemary Aquilina delivered a powerful statement before sentencing him to 40 to 175 years in prison, saying, "I just signed your death warrant." In a second trial, Nassar pleaded guilty to 3 additional counts of sexual assault. More victims shared their painful stories in court. He was sentenced to an additional 40 to 125 years in prison. Total sentences and prison time. With multiple consecutive sentences, Nassar is serving 60 years, federal sentence for child pornography. 40 to 175 years, Ingham County. 40 to 125 years, Eaton County. His earliest possible parole date is the year 2117, meaning he will spend the rest of his life in prison. While Nassar's sentencing provided some closure, many survivors and advocates argue that the institutions that enabled him have not faced full accountability. Michigan State University agreed to a $500 million settlement for victims. USA Gymnastics filed for bankruptcy and settled for $380 million. The FBI was criticized for failing to act on reports of abuse, leading to Senate hearings. Despite the suffering Nassar caused, the bravery of his victims transformed the conversation around sexual abuse and institutional accountability, ensuring that their voices and their fight for justice will never be forgotten. The Larry Nassar scandal was not just a case of one man's horrific crimes. It exposed deep-rooted institutional failures and sparked significant changes in the way abuse is handled in sports, law enforcement, and beyond. While Nassar himself will never walk free again, the ongoing impact of his actions continues to shape policies, survivor advocacy, and institutional accountability. The bravery of Nassar's survivors, many of whom were once young gymnasts, Olympic athletes, and students, has led to a powerful movement. Survivors like Rachel Denhollander, Ali Raisman, Simone Biles, and Michaela Maroney have used their voices to demand greater protections for athletes. Many have become activists and public speakers, sharing their stories to prevent similar abuses in the future. The case inspired the creation of nonprofits and legal funds aimed at supporting survivors of sexual abuse. The Larry Nassar scandal stands as one of the most horrifying cases of abuse in sports history, but it is also a powerful testament to the strength of survivors. His crimes went unchecked for decades, enabled by institutional failures, negligence, and a culture of silence within USA Gymnastics, Michigan State University, and even the FBI. However, the courage of the survivors, many of whom were young athletes, Olympians, and children when they were abused, led to a historic reckoning that changed the landscape of athlete protection and sexual abuse awareness. Nassar's multiple life sentences ensure that he will never harm another child again, but his legacy is more than just a prison sentence. The survivors' voices have sparked reforms, changed laws, and held powerful institutions accountable. Their testimony not only brought justice, but also inspired a global movement, proving that abusers cannot hide behind power and silence forever. This case serves as a warning to institutions that protect predators, a wake-up call for stronger safeguards, and an inspiration for survivors everywhere, reminding them that their voices matter and that justice, no matter how delayed, is always worth fighting for.
Thanks for watching. For more interesting videos, please subscribe.